Perfect. So great conversations today. I love that all of these conversations are happening. I am here to share you a little bit about my journey from going from somebody who identified as very much non-technical. I have a degree in marketing and strategic communications to now I've run a software company for more than 15 years, and kind of that journey of identity around these ideas of, am I technical or am I not? And so to start things off, I want to do just a little poll. So you can either go to menti.com. I'm also going to enter the code 1191599. I also put a link in the chat, and please use the chat to talk. But I want to think about, is my entire screen highlighted, Elizabeth?
I can see your video, but not if you're sharing slides. I can't see.
I'm sharing slides. Let me do that real quick while you guys are doing that. Perfect.
There we go. We can see now.
All right. So, and feel free. Why do you feel this way? How does it feel comfortable? Because really, identity is about how we feel, right? It's about the words that we use. It's about how we identify. It's about how we describe ourselves to others. It's when somebody describes us, does it feel congruent, or is it like, oh, no, that's not it at all? So for me, I found that the idea of non-technical just really fit. And we'll come back to kind of the results in just a little bit, but it looks like there's kind of a balance here. There's people who are feeling non-technical, technical. Is there anyone who already feels like they are both in the chat? And if you're shy, that's totally fine. So, some people don't feel technical at all. Some people feel both. That's excellent. Oh, it depends on the context. That's a really good insight. Perfect. This is wonderful because hopefully you all don't have to go on as painful a journey as I have, but I'll share with you, just in case you are in this place, kind of how all of this happened for me. So it started when I was in high school. This is my friend Scott. We reconnected at our 10-year high school reunion, and he asked me to be the CEO of his new startup company. And he loves fixing bugs in software systems. That's his jam. That's what he loves to do. And I was like, I don't code at all. I don't know what you're talking about. And he was like, no, I've read your blog. I was a freelance writer for years. I read your blog. You have a programming mindset. The way you think about it, I think you're going to be really good at it. So I decided to go ahead and say yes. And so we just celebrated our 15th business anniversary on May 1st, which was exciting. And this picture was actually taken the day before we got married. So if you look, it says Corgi Love, or the name of our company is Corgi Bites. So that was fun. But when I was, there was one moment that really, really got me. I had been coding with Scott for years, and we were on the way to visit his grandmother. It was about 3 hours away. And we were super excited because, we were still a small fledgling startup, and we had gotten onto our first podcast. So Scott, we were listening on the way. Scott was the person who was being interviewed. And at the end of it, the podcast host asked about the company's origin story. And Scott said, that, we reconnected in high school, and that I was a non-technical founder, and that I had done great with marketing and sales, and all of the non-technical things. And he said non-technical a few times. And so when I got back, like when we finished listening to the podcast, I was like, how could you? I've been working so hard. I've been coding right alongside you. I've learned all of these programming languages. I'm shipping code to production. I'm working with our clients. Like, what is it going to take for you to call me technical? Do I need to get a degree? Do I need to go get some kind of certification? Like, what is it in your eyes that is going to make you feel like I'm technical? And he paused. He's kind of a calm, quiet person. And he said, right before I recorded that podcast, I really spent time paying attention to what you used to call yourself. And right before that podcast, we were in a sales meeting, and that's what you said. And I was like, oh my gosh, I did. And so then he said, when you start calling yourself technical, I will too. And that phrase just really, really, really stuck with me, because it put the idea that it wasn't the external validation that I needed to really form my identity. This was internal work that I had to do. So in many ways, it really was an identity crisis, because I was thinking about, like, who am I? What is technical? How does this happen? And so I ran into what I have since learned and called the 5 frustration factors. And I did feel a little bit like I was walking into this unknown territory and kind of slaying these beasts. And some of them I've already heard talked about today. So I'm going to go through kind of what I discovered and how I overcame them, and give you some ideas and some questions to ask yourself if this is a challenge that you're going through, or if this is something that someone else in your life is going through. All right, so first is social conditioning. Now, I am also kind of an elder millennial here. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and this was a toy that I played with. It was called Teen Talk Barbie. And when you press the back, she goes, math class is tough. Do you have a crush on anyone? Party dresses are fun. Math class is tough. And so there were so many different small cultural signals that I received and then internalized that no, you should go into communications and kind of the non-technical things, right? Because culturally, that was the message that I was getting. And these can be super subtle. So here is a study from 2018. Now, it's been shown over and over again that gender has no impact on math ability, right? That's not something like math is just something that humans do, and the gender doesn't have an impact. But the way we phrase these things matters. So here's 2 statements. Girls and boys do equally well at math, or girls do as well as boys at math. And this was done in an effort to, change the pipeline problem and get more women interested in STEM. But the second statement, the participants who had heard that, when they did a survey later, they judged boys as more talented in math by a margin of 2 to 1. So even when we're trying, these are super subtle and things that we need to really think through. So for me, it was, what are the internalized beliefs that I need to re-examine in order to feel comfortable calling myself technical? And this math one was a big deal. I remember in 3rd grade, someone came to me and said, oh, you can't, do math. And my grades went from A's to C's because I just really internalized a lot of these things. So thinking about your culture, thinking about, your family, thinking about all of these things that, developed your identity. And then what are the ones that you need to look at and go, does the evidence line up here? Next was my fixed mindset. And I heard this talked about. And I really did believe that I just couldn't change. I thought that I was born with inherent abilities, and the fixed mindset, it's Carol Dweck's work, where, the idea of a fixed mindset is that you believe that your abilities are innate, they're set in stone, they can't change. And a growth mindset is the power of yet. It's belief that you can grow and change. You are capable of learning new skills. It's going to be hard. It's going to take work. However, you have grown and learned new things before. So believing that you can do something new rather than getting entrenched in what you already know. So this was a really big deal. And I noticed a lot of negative self-talk around myself, like, I can never do this. And then I would reframe it. I would kind of look at those little things and go, yet. And that was kind of a little hack I did, where anytime I caught myself with negative self-talk, I would go, what, yet? And that over time really, really did work. So for you, if you're struggling with kind of this fixed mindset, where can you apply that power of yet? Where is it that you're struggling where you feel like, I just can't do this? And it could be that it's just flat out hard, right? It's hard for everyone. But where can you apply that power of yet and recognize that you have grown before? And so where can you grow again? Now, perfectionism, this was a real challenge for me. It continues to be. And what's interesting is the research from the fixed mindset, growth mindset, is that having a fixed mindset can lead strongly to perfectionism. So if you have a fixed mindset, you can very easily slip into perfectionism, especially if you care very much about what the external signals that you're getting. And I thought perfectionism was good. For the longest time, I used it as a motivation tool. So I would say things like, I'm not type A, I'm type A plus to my clients. And I would stay up and I would work really late and I would obsess over every single detail. But it wasn't until about 2012 that I really learned that perfectionism is rooted in shame. And shame is the fear of losing community. It's the fear of not being enough. It's the fear of not having love and belonging. And it's the feeling that if I do everything perfect, then I will deserve love. Then people will like me. And the opposite of shame, the antidote, the thing that we can use to tamper shame down is compassion, right? Which is the heartfelt feeling and the actionable wanting to relieve suffering. And so Kristen Neff is a great researcher who studies self-compassion. And so a lot of times when we think about empathy, it's about sending it outward. If you're struggling with perfectionism, it's critical that you also send that compassion inward and recognize that mistakes are universal. Everyone makes mistakes, right? Not personalizing mistakes, recognizing that there are systemic forces at play that you should consider, right? And then talking to yourself like you would a friend. Those things are very critical. And over time, your perfectionism can wane, but it's important to get this right and to really address this, not get it. See, my perfectionism language is coming out, right? But it's important to address this because perfectionism can lead to really, really poor health. It can lead to poor mental health. And there are really, really big risks here when you think that you're doing well. So this was a big one. So the idea here is if you're struggling with perfectionism, it's not the thing that you're doing. It's not about chasing that dopamine hit of like doing it and getting that external validation. Instead, you'll look at your fear. And this is why it felt like kind of those monsters, because you figure out what is underlying all of this. What is the fear that is driving my compulsion? And for me, this took professional help, right? Therapists, doctors, to really kind of get a grapple on this too. So one of the other things with perfectionism actually leads to what's called the confidence gap. This was researched around the early 2010s, and it was a survey that was done at Xerox that they were they really wanted to promote women to more senior leaderships and executives, but they found that no one was applying. And so they did a survey to kind of figure out why. And they found that women would only apply if they met 100% of the job criteria. Like, you've got those bullet points and it's like, these are the things you should do. But men applied when they met 60%. And I remember I was in a workshop when I heard this and literally said out loud, no one ever told me you could apply with 60%. I never got that memo. And so for me, this has become a mantra of 60% risks. Am I 60% confident that something positive could come out of it? Am I 60% confident that I should pursue this or that I'm qualified? Because waiting for that 100%, what we end up doing is self-selecting out. The opportunities are put in front of us and we don't take them. And that is a huge problem. So for me, it was like, I was really scared. I didn't feel like I was qualified, but yet amazing things happened. So for you, think about like, where can you take a 60% risk? Where can you lead a new initiative? Where can you ask for a promotion? Where can you ask for a raise? Where can you start, a new business if you're kind of one of the vendors here or things? Like, how can you enter a new market? How can you have a bold, innovative idea that you fight for, right? Where are those 60% risks? Because if we wait to be 100% confident, then we just won't do it. And then finally is imposter syndrome. And this is my current battle. And imposter syndrome is feeling like a fraud, even when the facts show that you're successful. Right? So for me, I started kind of taking these 60% risks. I got invited to keynote. I got written up in great press releases. I got put on these really fancy lists. I won awards for some of the ideas, but even still, it's like, I don't deserve all of this, because it goes back to that, like, I don't know if I'm technical enough. People are going to find out that I don't know everything about every technology that was ever made ever. And only the people who have that are the ones who deserve this. And so it's this reconciliation between your personal success and the evidence that you deserve it, and discounting all of that evidence and saying, no, that actually doesn't apply to me, right? So imposter syndrome really is a framing challenge, which is why I put a blank frame here, because the way that you frame things really matters. So the idea here is like, where does my framing misalign with the facts, right? And, in some cases it was like looking at, no, I really did a lot of hard work, and looking back at all the blog posts I wrote, looking back at all the calls that I made, looking back and saying, you know what, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to interview all of these people and learn. So, looking at the evidence, but then also having support. And so I heard, in the last panel, the importance of community. And I can't emphasize that enough, is that you cannot slay these frustration factors on your own, right? You feel like you're on your own, but you're not, right? Having that team behind you who can support you is so, so important, because a lot of these you can start spiraling, and you need people, like, it's almost like quicksand, who are like, no, I got you. And so for me, Scott, really was this support system. So here are some like actual conversations that we've had over the past 15 years that kind of represent this. So, we had a conversation. There was a movie that came out in the 1980s called War Games. And, kind of just broad picture synopsis. It's about this kid from high school who kind of hacks into NORAD and then almost starts a nuclear war. And that's bad, but he's seen as this like renegade hero. Right. And so Scott was describing, like, when he saw this movie, he was like, oh my gosh, I can do computers, because the main character looked like him. But the person that I identified in that movie was a character named Jennifer, who was the sidekick, which in the 80s in tech movies, right, where computers are seen, women are sidekicks at best, sexual objects at worst. And so I told him, I was like, yeah, well, I saw War Games, but the character that I identified, like, there's a scene where she's not even allowed to go into the computer lab because she's a girl and they don't want to disrupt the guys who are in there. She's going to be a distraction. And so looking at those kind of cultural signalings and how Scott was like, no, this is super confident. For me, I was like, oh, I don't belong. The fixed mindset, right? I'll never understand this stuff. I said this so many times, like, while I was learning the code. And Scott was like, no, your brain really does work. Like, you think about algorithm really well. You're an excellent pattern matcher. And where you're tripping up is the syntax. Like, where does a semicolon go? And like, what do I name classes and things? And it was like, that was the place where I was struggling. And he was like, that's hard for everyone. It takes a long time to memorize. And I have to look things up on Google all the time. So don't compare yourself to this like super excellent thing. I was like, okay, you're right. Yeah, I don't understand it yet. For perfectionism, this one got serious. And Scott came up to me and was like, I am really, really worried about your health. I ended up having to go to the hospital several times for mental health issues. And he just was very clear. He's like, I'm watching you literally kill yourself trying to be perfect, and it's hard. And we can't do this anymore. And I was in a place where I was like, I don't know how to escape this. I don't know how to do this. So, finding professional help, finding doctors, finding therapists, right? That I'm still, this is something I'm going to be in for the rest of my life, right? That is the type of friendships that you need, right? Those are the type of relationships that you need, who can be direct and say, this is harmful to your health and I'm scared. So this one was a big one, right? And sometimes it does take that level of severity and kind of seriousness. For the confidence gap, this one, so I pitched to this really prestigious periodical called the First Round Review. There are people who I super admire who have been featured there. And I had a business coach and she suggested I pitch. And this was one of those like, oh, no, I never would have done it. And she was like, it's a 60% risk, just pitch. And so I did, and they liked what I had to say. And they wrote a feature on me and the work that we were doing. And it hit #1 on Hacker News, which, if you're not familiar with what Hacker News, it's essentially the equivalent to being featured on like Oprah's Favorite Things or something, or like, getting this really huge press where everyone kind of knows. And it just went viral. And we're still getting kind of clients who read that article and reach out to us. And then that led to speaking engagements. And, that's where kind of all the list stuff started. So it was scary actually to get all of that exposure. But at the same time, it wouldn't have happened had I not if I had self-selected out. And then finally, imposter syndrome. I said this like literally 3 days ago, where it's like, I don't deserve these opportunities. I just landed, a book deal and things like that. And, having someone who's like, no, you've worked hard on this for a decade. Here is the path. You're not just getting these things because you're a woman or because people like you. Like, you've worked really hard, and here's kind of the path that got you here. So my advice to kind of close this up is, we need to stop thinking about things as either or, right? If we think of ourselves as either this or this in terms of our identity, technical, non-technical, right? Then what we get is we get separation, because the function of or is separation. It is this or it is this. And that is where, on a corporate level, we get silos, we get stereotyping. It breeds resentment and contempt and shame. And that is not the kind of culture that we want to exist in. But when we can think in terms of both and, which is more of a flexible mindset, it's, I don't have to give up my identity as somebody who loves strategic communications in order to also be good at software. I can actually bring my skill set about communications into software, and I can be both, right? Then we get collaboration, we get innovation, because we've got different ideas that are working together. We get trust, creativity, we get more resilience, both within ourselves and also within our organizations. So as you go forward to kind of close this out, my advice is to embrace the undefined, right? Your identity is not set in stone. You can change it, right? It takes work, but you are not defined. And this was, one of the things that I did to really kind of anchor this was when I went to conferences, I would, reach out my hand. And one of the first questions that I got actually was, are you technical or non-technical when I was speaking at these conferences? So I actually got a code snippet, kind of on my arm. But this is when you run this piece of code, because there's nothing in between the parentheses, it comes back as undefined, right? And so to me, when I'm worried or I feel like I don't belong, this was kind of a permanent thing. And then there's also the semicolon as well for suicide prevention. And, it's a reminder that I can be both. And so that is my advice to you, is to embrace being undefined, go figure out what you want to define yourself, and recognize that you don't have to be either or, you can be both. So thank you very much. That's what I've got. And I run a community. So if this is interesting to you, it's called Empathy in Tech. You can go to empathyintech.com. We have community events and things like that. I'm hoping to launch a podcast in the next few months. And then in consulting, I have a company where we focus on this as well. So, and I think we have a little bit of time for questions. Am I right about that?
We have a couple of minutes. So if anybody has any questions, please pop them in the chat, and I will ask them to Andrea. Maybe a question from me. In terms of kind of empathy, if you're seeing a colleague who's struggling with some of these frustration factors that you're talking about, and you think that, they could call themselves technical when they're afraid to say it, like, how can you help someone? Because obviously a lot of this stuff is kind of internal work, but how do you help other people who you see are struggling with it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is connection, right? Like, form connection, be there. Like, and a lot of times when, empathy doesn't always happen with talking. It can be just being present with someone while they're struggling. And, it's listening. Sometimes it's saying, I've been there too. Here's what I did. If that's, ask, I've gotten in the pattern of kind of asking, do you want my perspective? Because sometimes people just want to vent. So a lot of times the empathy, there's 4 components to empathy, right? There is affect sharing, which is recognizing and sharing emotions. There's cognitive empathy, which is thinking about other people's perspectives, right? And recognizing their point of view. There's also compassion, which is called empathic concern, which is that, I see you're suffering and I want to help. And then finally, there's emotional regulation, which is if you see someone and they're really spiraling, Scott, for me, was just a very calm, anchoring force. And so his superpower for emotional regulation really helped me when I was spinning out of control. So recognizing kind of those 4 elements, it depends on the situation, but those are some ways that you can kind of really be there. And people who I've cultivated relationships with have demonstrated that many different times in my life, and I try to be there for them as well.
Great answer, thank you. There's just one other comment I saw in the chat. Maybe you can quickly answer that one, and then when we'll is how do you avoid comparing yourself to others in order to stay undefined?
Oh, this is so hard. Yeah, I think it comes with practice, right? And I think it comes with kind of self-assurance, and it comes with self-worth. For me, it has come in recognizing that people are always going to be naysayers. There are always going to be people who disagree with you. The more your ideas get spread, the, kind of bigger exposure you get, the bigger projects you take on, the more criticism you're going to get. And so kind of developing I've heard the metaphor of being kind of like a duck, not in the, kind of you're calm on top, but like frantically going, but more that you just let things roll off of you, right? You listen to it, but you don't necessarily internalize it, right? You can listen to critical feedback and you can go, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. And then taking the stuff that's relevant. But if someone is, being really awful or mean, like, you don't have to let that in. And that is something that I am really practicing. It's super hard, but it is a practice. So, yeah.
There was just one other really good question, if you can stay one more minute.
Yeah, of course.
The question was, has it ever happened to you that you needed more than one anchor friend or mentor to actually believe what they're saying?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for me, I often need these messages multiple times, right? Especially like if I'm in a relationship and then like something happens, right? And I tend to take it just really personally, right? That's why cultivating kind of this support group, and also getting professional help, because there could be things that like really are preventing you, from internalizing that. So yes, absolutely. Having kind of one friend is good, but having also a group of friends, that can help you move through this. And, the believing part, for me, sometimes it takes years. And, there are still things that like I kind of mentally believe it, but then like bringing it into your heart and going, yeah, I am good at this, right? I know that my work matters. I am confident in what I have to say. That can be just a real challenge that is just part of some people's mission in life here, I think.
Absolutely. Oh, great. Thank you so much, Andrea. That was such a great note to end on. And yeah, we will go into our next break now. So thank you very much for being here with us today. I hope
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks to everybody for attending, and big shout out to you, Elizabeth, for all the organizing that you've done behind the scenes.